All right, you're already accepted at Community Rewatch, episode 1. I'm Jonathan. That's Ethan.
Hey guys.
Ethan, is Community the most engaging show ever? Now, let me kind of preface that by saying, okay, like I love Seinfeld, but I don't want to be a Seinfeld character, right? Like I don't want to, you know, like be in that world, or even like with something like Parks and Rec, like sounds like really fun, but like I'm not sure how much I want to be in that world. Let me ask you something. I'll tell you what, I would love to be a student at Community. Like, I would love to be a student at Greendale. It would just, like everything about it. The lack of care from people in on the staff, and the hilarious point of views of the students. I would love to be a character in Community. So again, is Community the most engaging show that you've ever watched?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thought. Like there, I have a lot of favorite TV shows. Obviously, like The Office is it's a show I love. Parks and Rec. I like Frasier, some of the old classic comedies. But like, there's something about Community that like I think especially anybody who's been to college or any kind of education, any kind of college campus can kind of like see some of the parallels between like Greendale and like their experience in college. And I think in some way, like anybody who's been to college has kind of lived at Greendale, even if like it's kind of like an extreme thing. Like obviously my college didn't have, paintball wars. But like, I think there's some, a lot of ways that we can see ourselves in the characters maybe. And so I think that's what makes it engaging to me, is that even if I never lived some of these adventures that these characters are having, like the lessons that they learn and like the character growth that we see through these characters, and just their experiences, going to a college and trying to find themselves and figure out what they're doing. To me, that makes it engaging because that's something that I think a lot of shows write their characters well, but I don't necessarily feel like I always relate to the characters. Like I don't relate to Jim Halpert in The Office. He's a funny guy, and I think there's some qualities about him that are admirable, but I don't see myself in him. I don't see myself in Ron Swanson. As much as I think a lot of people want to see themselves in Ron Swanson, I don't. But I think that's what about Community. It's kind of I think, and not even like I'm drawn to one character. There's kind of a mix of all of them. I think, Abed has some qualities that I feel like, I can relate to that and I can understand it. And Jeff, maybe to some extent, and maybe not too much because I'm not, a lawyer or that narcissistic. But I think that's what makes it engaging to me, is just there's a kind of a personal attachment, I think, to it. You get attached to the characters maybe more so than some other shows. I don't know if you feel the same way, but
No, that's a good point. And like when I think about like what got me into Community, like so like again, the show started fall of 2009. At the time, all I did was like watch TV after school. Like I just came home and I just watched like I had no hobbies. I did nothing, and that was something. And we'll talk about the pilot and the second episode, Spanish 101. And there's a moment in there specifically that like really hooks me in. That like, oh, this isn't just another, you know, 2000s like kind of funny, quirky comedy. Like there's something special here. I think you're like kind of hit that in the sense of like it draws you in with its characters, and it like you get to kind of see a bit of yourself in these people, but also at the same time like not being these people, and like kind of being able to enjoy it and kind of have that space. um I don't know, how'd you find out about Community, and what kind of kept you watching?
so Community was a show I started watching it before kind of the pandemic started, but it was kind of right before it. So I watched it during the pandemic as well, right at the beginning. It was a show that I had seen, online. I used to frequent Reddit quite a bit. I don't as much anymore, but it was a show that I saw a lot, especially because I was somebody as a fan of, The Office and Parks and Rec and Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It was a show that it was kind of up there that I saw people mention a lot with those as being like some of the top shows in comedy, like in the history of comedy TV, and especially that, those late 2010s, or late 2000s, early 2010s shows. It was one of those, and it wasn't a show I was familiar with. That's not something that I thought, at the time, nobody really talked about Community. As this is back, 2019, 2020. At that time, it was still kind of a niche show. It wasn't on Netflix yet. It was on Hulu, but it was kind of, nobody really talked about it that I knew of and that I'd seen anywhere. There's a show that I'd seen people talk about online, and so I figured I'd give it a shot. I honestly, the fact that I knew Chevy Chase was in it, and I was obviously, Chevy Chase is a funny guy, familiar with from Vacation and National Lampoons and everything, but he was the only guy I really knew about. I knew who Ken Jeong was, but I knew he wasn't really a main character, and so I wasn't really familiar with some of the actors in the show as much. But I figured I'd give it a shot, see what it was like. Something about seeing life at a community college. That sounded like there could be a lot of potential there, right? There's a lot you could do with that. And man, I was blown away. Like, my expectations for the show, for it to be just this funny, kind of a workplace comedy, not a workplace comedy, a situational comedy. Like, it just took that to the next level, and like just the cleverness of it. That's something that I'll bring up as we talk about some of these episodes. Like, there are a lot of key moments through some of these episodes that, especially in season 1, that like, it just hooked me in. Like, this show is funny, but like, oh man, that moment, that's what drew me in. Like, that got me hooked on the show. That's what made me a fan of it. Just, a lot of the clever writing. I mean, Dane Harmon is a genius. I think he's a great writer. I think he's a great creative mind. And it was a new thing. I was dipping my toes into something new, something that I wasn't familiar with in terms of Dane Harmon. I wasn't familiar with him at all, and some new actors, but just, the writing and the storyline, and just these situations that all these characters were in, all these backgrounds that we saw in Jeff and Annie and Troy, and coming together. I mean, I saw so much potential for the show when I started watching it. And yeah, like I said, I was blown away. My expectations were just demolished, and in a good way. Like, it went far above what I thought the show was going to be. And I think just the creativeness of some of the storylines kept me coming back, because there's always something new and fresh in this show. It didn't ever feel like it was just becoming a copy of itself. I think some of the shows get into that, especially in the later seasons, where they're kind of self-aware. And Community, I think, rose above that. I'm not saying every episode was the best ever, but there was something different about it that made me realize it was something special.
No, and you kind of hit it there. Like, a lot of shows, because I was thinking about this a bit this weekend. Like, what does Community look like with a regular writing staff, with a writing staff that's not special? Like, if this was a show on Fox, I mean, like, what does it look like? And it's probably like a bit of like How I Met Your Mother, but not quite as like quick. And it's probably got a little bit of like Parks and Rec, where like, oh, we got to go do something. And like, there's a bit of that in the series, but it I mean, really, it's not until season 5 when they're like, oh, we have to collectively go do something. But they, in that season, they still make it really strong, and like they make it believable, and like they do it in its own kind of Greendale way. Okay, so it's funny that you mentioned Chevy Chase. Okay,
Chevy, man.
doing this, thinking like rewatching this show, working this, I go back and forth, because at some points I'm like, I can watch this entire series and skip every Chevy Chase line, and I feel good about it. But at the same time, again, as we're just doing this rewatch, there was a moment in there where I'm like, okay, I see his value. At least in the first season where we're at, like, okay, I continue to see his value. I see why he's there. And as I was kind of studying this, I guess Dan Harmon just kind of loved him, like just loved, again, like Chevy Chase is kind of a comedic acting legend, and Dan Harmon was just a big fan of him. And it's kind of one of those things where I'm like, is a different actor in a different spot, a different time, a better role than Pierce? It is, but like, it's kind of like family, where it's like, it is what it is. They are who they are. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of go back and forth, but like, I don't know. How do you feel about Chevy Chase overall in this series?
Well, I think you mentioned, like, you see his value, and like that's obviously, we'll get in this first episode. Like, that's obviously a big part of episode 1 with the pilot, is like Jeff says that to Ovid in like the first 5 minutes of the series, like, and then at the end of the episode again. But like, I think that's really what the first, maybe if not the first season, at least the first episode is about, is like there's value even in Pierce, who is this racist, sexist, pig, basically unlikable. I mean, nobody wants to be Pierce, right? Nobody wants to see themselves in him, but like there is still a value in him. And I don't know what part you're talking about with Pierce exactly, but might be talking about the same thing. There were some parts rewatching the pilot in episode 2, especially 2 with Jeff and Pierce, where I don't, Pierce is obviously a guy I wouldn't probably want to be friends with in real life, but like in the context of the show and where he fits in with the rest of the study group, like I think you see his value as a character. If not, even if he's a terrible person, like he does have his moments, and I think especially as throughout the show we start to learn more about him and his upbringing and his relationship with his father and his past marriages and everything he's gone through up to that point. Like I think not excusing his behaviors, but like you start to get some context behind who he is, and maybe start to at least appreciate his experiences. Again, even if you don't condone his behavior, and like we can laugh at Pierce, right? We laugh at his behavior and just think he's a dick, really is what he is. But like at the same time, I think unfortunately there's people like that out there in the world, and I think Chevy Chase hit I think he hit a home run with how he played the character. I know that there were behind the scenes issues, between him and Dan Harmon later in the show and some of the cast and crew, and he was kind of a guy that people didn't really get along with very well. And it makes me sad as somebody who, again, watching some of Chevy Chase's earlier stuff when he was, in the 80s, 90s, 70s, that he was a legend in comedy. It's an unfortunate part of it because, it's kind of, you always hear, don't meet your hero. You don't want to meet your heroes. And I think this is a good example of a time when he's a great actor. He's also probably not a great person, but I think his portrayal of Pierce, I don't know if anybody else really could have done as well as he did. I would be interested to see somebody else, I guess, try to do Pierce, but it wouldn't be the same. I just think Chevy Chase had that kind of arrogant, old man, just unaware of what he's saying maybe, and how it's how he's not caught up with the 21st century. I think that Chevy Chase did a great job portraying it, but man, there's a lot of just really cringy lines and scenes with Pierce that I agree I could do without them, honestly. On some of the episodes you could take them out and they probably wouldn't really lose much, but on this rewatch, I think I definitely am trying to have a better appreciation for some of the maybe more unheralded characters. I think Pierce is one of those, because I think that even if he's not a super likable guy, I think you can appreciate how important he is to the core of the show.
Dan Harmon, this was kind of his big break. Like going through the IMDb, he had done a lot of smaller stuff. Worked on some commercials, written like some smaller video stuff with like Jack Black, which is like like I always think like sometimes the references or the connections or the guest appearances are like random, but like, oh, there's a reason Jack Black's in the show later in the season, later in the series. And but he had written some stuff for like this Sarah Silverman show and written some other things, but this was kind of his big break, especially like his creative big break, where it was kind of his baby. He was the showrunner, and obviously, because we're doing this, he pretty much knocked it out of the park. Like, the pilot was directed by the Russo brothers, which they directed a lot of episodes and worked on a lot of episodes, especially in the first season. And it's no mistake that you see a bunch of the Greendale actors and Greendale characters in the various Marvel movies that come up later in the 2010s. Debuted on September 17th, 2009. Over 7.5 million people watched the first episode, which I'm pretty sure is the highest rated episode of the series. Opened with good reviews, praising the writing and the characters, kind of like what we talked about so far. All right, best lines / best scenes. This one's underrated, but again, doing the rewatch, I just really appreciated it. Okay, so it's Jeff and Professor Duncan talking on the football field, and it's that part where he's like, "You're a 6-year-old girl." It's like, or a 6-year-old girl could yell at you like that. He's like, yeah, that'd be adorable. It's like, no, because you're 5 and there's a pecking order. And like you just and it's kind of it's just again a short scene, but it's just Jeff being Jeff. And like there's so many moments in the show where like Jeff being Jeff, it's kind of like in South Park where it's like Cartman just being Cartman just kind of works. Like you kind of can write you out of spaces.
Yeah, man. Shout out
What's
to
the
John Oliver too. Like real quick. I mean that
yeah.
it's from episode one. Like, and obviously now like he's a big name in late night talk shows and comedy. But like he has great acting chops. Like he I think really holds his own in episode one. And like he's obviously a character that doesn't have as much screen time probably as he should throughout the course of the show. But like we get some great Duncan lines, and I think that exchange between Jeff and him on the football field, and like even just the first time we see Duncan when Jeff comes into his office and we're introduced to Duncan, and really that's how we're introduced to Jeff too in that scene, and we find out why he's at Greendale. Like they have great chemistry, and I love the relationship they have and their friendship.
We have the sound system. Okay, in the opening scene, the sound system that the dean is using is just like a Sony boombox, which is like it's
I
such
didn't
like a
catch that.
perfect. Yeah, like it's just he's just got like a handheld mic plugged like from an aux cord into like just like a Sony boombox. It's goofy. It's again it really fits the character of the show.
I
Another
didn't
thing I
notice it was
noticed,
a boombox. I guess I didn't pay attention to that. It's a funny scene with the dean. I didn't realize that it was just a basic boombox.
yeah, because I remember looking around. I was like, wait a second, that's just like that's you know 16-inch maybe 18-inch boombox that he's just talking through. Um, in that opening scene, the dean is wearing a wedding ring, which I couldn't find anything on that, but I was just like, oh, interesting. Um, Britta being 28, I just forgot it. Yeah, like it's kind of one of those things in the show where because we have Troy and Annie who are around 18, 19, Abed, who I guess is probably around the same age. Britta's like late 20s. Shirley's probably late 30s. Jeff's probably I guess he turns 40, so later in season 6, so he's probably 34, 35. But I don't know why that shocked me so much, Britta being like 28 years old. I guess I pictured her as part of like the younger crew, like maybe 22, 23. But
Yeah, well, I mean, you got to remember, Jonathan, that she did live in New York for a while, so she had to have some time in
yeah.
there. Yeah, living in New York. Yeah, I like. I don't remember on my initial watching of this show. I guess the first conversation that Jeff and Abed have, and Abed kind of gives that rundown of Britta, and like he mentioned she has two older brothers, I believe,
Mhm.
which was something I don't remember catching, and like I don't remember some of those details about Britta, like the 28-year-old thing. I guess I never caught that either. And back to the dean with the wedding ring thing. Like I don't think that ever gets mentioned again. Like he's obviously not married throughout the rest of the show. So I
Yeah.
don't know if it's one of those things where the writing put it in there and then just forgot. It's a pilot that happens a lot in shows where people get forgotten, the
Yep.
details get forgotten. But that is an interesting detail. You notice I didn't catch that. Britta being 28 is a bit of a shock just because I guess you don't really think about her age as much. They don't talk about that as much, but that is interesting.
In the promo material, and it's highlighted in the first episode. They kept it in, but there's this joke. There's a joke between Duncan and Jeff where Duncan's like, "Oh, I thought you got your degree from Columbia." He's like, "Now I have to get one from America." Now, I remember that being in the commercials for the show before they aired, and at the time I was like, yeah, again, I was like 11 or 12 at the time. I'm like, oh gosh, like, because it's kind of just like a little switcheroo, like, oh, you thought, like, and I was like, at the time, I was like, if this show is gonna be this kind of comedy, then like, I can't, like, yeah, I mean, I'll check it out, I guess, but like, I'm really happy it's not like, and again, it's not a bad joke, but it's like, I remember watching that in the promo material. I'm like, huh, okay, but obviously it grows way past that. Um, I call this, I guess I call this time period of Britta competent Britta. Like I appreciate like just that she's not the worst Britta yet. Like especially in these early episodes, like she kind of has a little bit of a sense to her. And again, like it's kind of like you said earlier, where it's like the thing with these early episodes from the writers are still trying to figure out the dynamics trying to figure out the characters. But I definitely do appreciate competent Britta, especially in these first couple episodes.
Yeah, I agree. I think I appreciate early Britta, and I think it's odd seeing episode one Britta, or even just first season Britta with like later seasons. But even from this episode to like the second episode and later in season one, like she's so different. And I think she keeps some of the same qualities about her. Like her, I think that she's very loyal to people. And I think she does care about others around her. But just you said, she's she seems a lot more confident and a lot more. And I guess I'd say I don't want to say like intelligent. I don't want to say that she gets dumber throughout the show, but like I just think she is more of a comedic sidekick in the later seasons. And like in these first couple episodes, she's just kind of like almost like the straight man character. She's
Yeah.
kind of like she's almost like in my mind when I was watching this, I was thinking on Britta, like she's kind of sort of like I feel like a connection to like the audience watching this first episode. It's like we see Jeff like in the first, he's a very unlikable guy. Like he's obviously not a good person in the first episode, and for him being the main character, that's kind of a bold move to write that way because it's hard when you have an unlikable character like that. You want the audience to get to like them and to care about them, and obviously we do. But like in episode one, Britta calls him out on everything and is like, she's very realistic looking at Jeff. She sees through his BS. And I kind of saw that connection there where like I kind of feel like Britta is like the audience in this first episode. She's kind of like that bridge between the craziness of Greendale and us watching the show in the real world. I appreciate her a lot in the first episode, though, just for I think she's a big part of why the show why we have the study group. I mean, she's obviously an important character. I hate that she kind of turns into the dumb blonde, funny character later, but she has some good moments. And everybody hates on Britta. I think she's a fun character. I think Jillian Jacobs does a great job over there.
Yeah, and honestly, like, I was reading something about a different show. I think it was about Euphoria, where one of the actresses was upset with like the direction like that season two was taking like her character. Um, and I remember like thinking like with Gillian Jacobs, I'm like, I bet it's a little bit frustrating because like you're sitting doing those table reads of like this week's script or whatever for the upcoming episode, and it's like, wait a second, my character is like, she becomes kind of less important plot wise. She becomes kind of more of the butt of the joke. She becomes like less actually like accomplishing something. Like even thinking through the series, like Jeff's main point of accomplishment is like he's taking classes, he's trying to finish his degree. Like Annie's becoming more of like a mature person and woman and on her own right. Abed's becomes more and more social. Troy, continues to find himself. Pierce like actually finds true family, and Shirley confronts her personal life and eventually builds that into a business, and all these characters kind of really like clearly progress. And it's like with Britta, it's almost like, I mean, am I wrong? Like, does Britta really? I know we're kind of really projecting forward, kind of out of the first episode, but like, does Britta's character like really go anywhere? Like, after this, through the 6 seasons?
I think that um, I think she goes in a she has quite a journey. I feel like because I feel like especially in season one, there's kind of this her and Jeff kind of have this on and off. Are they going to date? He's interested in her, she's not interested in him, and then it kind of flips. She's interested in him, and and he's dating Slater, which we'll get to later on in season one. But like and then like second, third, the rest of the show, like that that relationship is never really explored again. I mean, there's the whole her and Jeff are hooking up reveal. I think it's in season two. The Abed reveals to everybody they've been hooking up. Like we don't really see them have that same relationship again that we see, and especially like in this first one, where like they almost he's pursuing her, and they kind of have this weird like sexual dynamic, but like they kind of are like also becoming friends.
Mhm.
And I think I do think that Britta kind of between season one and like season 5 and 6, she kind of is just like sandwiched in this she's just basically almost like a background character. She's just the butt of the joke, like you said. Um, there's not really a lot of storyline with her. But then I think I can't remember season it's in. There's an episode with her and her parents, and we see some more background. And there's a great episode I remember in season 6 with her and Elroy, where they are talking in his trailer about music and stuff. And there's some great scenes in there with them. And like we start to see Britta kind of become not so much of as just the butt of the joke again, but kind of a realistic. She has her downfall. She has her faults. She's not perfect, but she means well, and we start to see some character development from her. But I feel like of all the characters of the main study group, like I think besides Shirley, maybe I don't think Britta has a great arc at all, really, throughout the course of the show. Unfortunately, I just don't think the character development really is there as much as it is on the other characters, and I think that's an unfortunate thing because again, I think there's a lot with Britta that they could have done, and I think there's a lot you could have unpacked, but I just don't feel like it takes. She doesn't get quite as much of, I think, the attention in terms of story writing and storylines that the other characters got. And I think that's unfortunate.
My last big thing with this first episode is I really like how Jeff kind of pays for every level of like lie that he's trying to kind of achieve, or like every lie that he's trying to use in the show, he kind of has to pay for it, especially in this episode. So like he's trying to lie to Britta so he can be with Britta. He's lies about having a study group, and then like let me back up. Sorry. He tries to lie to Britta, be with Britta, but Britta rejects him. And he tries to cheat his way through college, and Duncan tricks him. He doesn't want a study group and pretends to have one, and then ends up with one. And it's like, and I was thinking about this show where it's like, this could have been okay if Jeff was just, you know, quick-witted, slick with the tongue, and just like telling people off, giving speeches, again, lawyering, basically. Like, that would be a fun 20 minutes of TV. Like, I'd watch it, you know what I mean? Like, just a guy who's confident and cool and just trying to get out of stuff, and like, um, succeeding most of the time, sometimes not succeeding, whatever. Like, that's a fun 25 minutes of television. But like, it's a lot more interesting to see this guy fail and kind of have to be humbled and kind of have to be picked up. Because I love at the end of the episode where like he opens a package and he finds, you know, he's looking through the notes of the test answers that he thought he had, and it says "booyah" and like, kind of a little running gag in there. And the study group kind of has to pick him up and like invite him in again. And I really kind of like that picture, because it's like Jeff is still awesome in the sense of like he's still got a silver tongue and he's still confident, and he's gonna get a lot of things done in the series, but like he kind of has to be humbled. um and it definitely like creates kind of a cool like understanding of like, oh, this character's not just gonna steamroll everybody. Like, he kind of has to be embarrassed, and he kind of has to be um, actually changed. And did you have any other kind of big point outs, best scenes or best lines that you wanted to point out from this first episode?
No, I was going to say on that last point, you're just talking about Jeff, like that scene with him sitting on the steps with the notes and like them all coming out. I noticed that too. And that's something I thought was great about this first episode is like we see early on, and obviously we know throughout the series, like Jeff is obviously the undoubted leader of the study group. Like in episode 1, we don't have that. We haven't seen that yet. We haven't seen. I mean, we saw the big speech from him, but that was more of him trying to talk his way into getting Britta to go on a date with him, like to get them to be unteachable. And we do kind of see that though. Like Jeff is supposed to be the guy who's there to pick everyone else up, and we see that throughout the series. He's the guy that keeps them together. I mean, he has times where they help him out, but for the most part, Jeff is the guy who is there to lead them and hold them together as a group. Like in this first episode, he is down with them. He's not any better than them. He was a lawyer on the outside. He has a nice car. He's smart. He's had experiences and stuff, and he's lived life already to some extent. None of that really matters anymore. When he comes to Greendale, like he is essentially just a normal person like everybody else. And I like that humility aspect of, like you mentioned him, he's being humbled. I think that's a great point. Like Jeff they show him forgiveness. I think because he kind of shows his human side, and he kind of it gets not brought down to them because they're lower than him, but just he thinks of himself higher than them, and he kind of gets knocked off his pedestal. And they're there to pick him up at the end, which I think is a great indicator of just how great of a relationship, a great preview of that friendship and that family aspect of the show. Even though he treated them like dirt, really, and was just hugely rude to them, they are willing to pick him up, forgive him, and accept him into part of their group. I think because they see him finally getting humbled, and I think the more human side of him, the more relatable side. I just like that scene. It's a good heartwarming scene for the first episode, and I think it really gives you a good. It really draws you in. I think to not only is it a comedy show, but I think there's some feel good moments as well. A lot of feel good moments throughout the show, and I think that's one of those early ones that kind of draws you in, touches your emotional human side.
Best of the seven, best of the Greendale seven. I'd say Britta for this episode. Again,
I'd
like kind of
agree.
what we talked about earlier, she
Yep.
kind of carries it. She moves it. Again, all the events of the episode, all the revelations, besides outside of like Jeff trying to cheat, which is kind of the B story anyway. Like it kind of revolves around her, and like she kind of stands her own. I'm like, okay, shout out to Britta. There you go. Um, you said Britta as well.
Yeah, I'd agree with Britta. Like we already talked about earlier, I just feel like she's kind of, I think, the main. I don't want to say the main character, but like, Jeff is the guy that the show's kind of about. But like, I think Britta is kind of that 1B like main character. And again, it's unfortunate because she kind of loses that status throughout the show. Like she kind of becomes more just a side character. Like in this first episode, and she holds her own. And I think like I respect her. I appreciate what she is in this first episode, and I think I yeah, I guess that's all I'm gonna say. Like I really like her character in the first episode. We don't really see a lot of the other characters either. Like we see a little bit of their personalities, but really it's just mainly Jeff and Britta in this first episode, and a little bit Abed maybe just because he's kind of in there, and Duncan. But Britta's, I think she stands out in this first episode. I think she's a very noticeable character, and I think she really stands out amongst all of the characters that we are introduced to in this first episode.
Most relatable to college for me was actually Duncan's office. I know it's like kind of like a little small thing, but like I just appreciate it because every time it's every department, every time I walked into a different professor's office, it was always smaller than like the guy actually needed the man or woman actually needed the space for. Especially like I remember because I started as a science major, and like it is like you walk into their office, it's got like a 6 foot couch that barely can fit in the room, and the walls are plastered with like science related, like you'd think that like the guy again, it's his room, it's but he just covers it with stuff that just says anthropology, like in like human studies, and it's just like that just reminded me very much of like, oh, that's every professor's office that I've ever had to walk into or ask questions in. Like, yeah, I would say Duncan's office is probably the most relatable part to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we get to see a lot of the college in this first episode. We see the football field, we see Duncan's office, we see the study room, and we see the outside part of the campus. With especially the first scene with the dean. And honestly, I feel like that's kind of like that first scene with the dean talking to all of the students, and announcing, and making these announcements to them. I feel like to me that was kind of a relatable thing, just because I feel like that's somebody who's been to college, you can kind of see like the way that the other students react to the dean, kind of just with disgust, and they're just kind of like annoyed with him, and I've seen that in as a college student, everybody's kind of just there to do their own thing. Nobody really wants to get involved. All these events that are going on to try to get kids. As when I started as a freshman, we had to go to campus for orientation and spend like a 3-day weekend just on campus. And there was all these events for us to do to get oriented to college and, get used to being on campus. And none of the kids really wanted to be there. None of us wanted to do these things. And it was kind of pointless really, at the time, and looking back, it still was kind of pointless, but it was more or less just to keep us busy. But I think that's kind of, especially just being in the first scene of the show, and like that's your introduction to Greendale. Like looking back at my, when I was a freshman coming into college, my first experience was like kind of similar to that. Where like, I don't want to be here. This is stupid. I just want to like do my own thing, go to class and like be done. And like, here's this dean who's like trying to pep everybody up with this speech and get people like to be happy and stuff. I just think it's funny, like, especially people are, our age, and then being that age of, around a 20 something or, 18, 19, like you're in a weird place you've never been before. You're away from home. Like you just want people to not talk to you and you want to do your own thing. And like, you don't really want to be there. I mean, you want to be there, but like, you don't know anybody. You just kind of do your own thing. You're trying to get used to life. And like, I appreciate that. I think that's just kind of a humorous, something I've seen and can relate to is having been to college before and seeing that people trying to get you excited for college, but you don't really know what you're getting into,
Man, you're trying to survive too. Like I remember my first day on campus where I was like, okay, my parents aren't here. I don't really know anybody besides, a couple people maybe from my high school. And it's like, yeah, why am I here? Like, what am I doing here? Like, it's such a strange feeling because like you're virtually on your own and you suddenly have all this responsibility. You're suddenly responsibility like your finances and your grades and your social circle. And it's fascinating. Um, Nitpick. Okay. There's again a brief scene where Britta goes outside and she's talking to Jeff and she's like, "You caught me. I smoke." Right. I feel like again maybe I'm overthinking this. I feel like Jeff doesn't wouldn't date a smoker. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Really?
yeah, like because okay, on one hand, I'm like, okay, he's a grown man. He's had a lot of experiences. Again, probably in his mid 30s. Knowing him, let's say he's relatively successful, like in terms of like relationships and hookups or whatever. So I'm like, okay, maybe he's, met a bunch of different type of women, but at the same time, I'm like, he, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking of like what Jeff kind of like portrays himself as, where it's like he just I don't know. I have a hard time believing that he'd want to be with a smoker. I don't know. But again, it doesn't like appear that Britta smokes a lot in the show. It just seems like an occasional thing. So it's like, okay, maybe it's not, I don't know, a complete turn off for him. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, it kind of just feels like a throwaway line because like I don't really they don't bring it up that much throughout the rest of the show of her being like a smoker, and I don't think she's like addicted to smoking, but obviously she smokes at some point. So we don't really see that throughout the rest of the show, but I think at the moment, the point is, we don't know if she knows that Jeff has been, we don't know if he's been figured out yet, if she's figured out what his intentions are, what his goals are, and what he's actually trying to do. And so for the point of storyline, that line, it makes sense and it's funny. But yeah, just in the grand scheme of the show, it kind of just feels, I guess, unnecessary. And just it's kind of a throwaway line, I feel like. And again, it's the pilot. We can forgive stuff in the pilot because the dean had a wedding ring and he's never get indication of that either. So, it's probably a minor thing, but that was a good point.
Episode 2, Spanish 101. Uh, again, directed by Joe Russo, written by Dan Harmon. Best scenes. This is okay. So as I kind of alluded
I
to
have a lot.
earlier, yeah, this that okay. I was because I want to say I watched this one live, that fall of 2009, but that Cheng scene when like they took that show when Cheng's entrance when he's like, they always say, "Why do you teach Spanish?" And they always say it like that. Why do you teach Spanish? And he goes on the whole El Tigre, Chino, like the whole thing. That scene took the show from okay, kind of casual, kind of fun sitcom to like, oh, this is something different. Like there's real attention and writing and like so just like what they're trying to do here is going to be different. And like I remember rewatching that scene again and just having that scene hook me in again of just I'm a Spanish genius. And just he's just oh gosh. And
Yeah.
Ken Jeong just I mean dominates this role.
Is there
And
a better introduction to a character than that? I mean, I don't know if there's any other character in a show that's ever been introduced. Like their first scene in the show is just so legendary.
I can't think of one. And also like it's impressive too the way he starts like as a regular professor and then goes crazy, and then all right, guys, we're back to take the card on your desk and match it with the picture, and it's like the way he just flips, and it's just it like again, it's gonna allude to like where his character eventually goes and where the writers take him, unknowingly, obviously, but like it's just yeah, that Chang entrance scene took the show from like okay, kind of interesting to there's something interesting here. There's something different.
Yeah.
Um,
On the topic of introductions too, like I think this episode has a lot of great, not just characters. Obviously we're introduced to the dean a little more. We see him in the first episode, but we actually kind of get more of a indicator of his character of kind of being like that annoying, like kind of too spunky, makes too many announcements type character. We don't really see him in the episode, but we kind of are a little bit more introduced to him. We get introduced to Starburns, obviously, a great kind of like one line thing. Like he's obviously kind of becomes a great side character throughout the rest of the show, and like just some funny lines and moments. We get introduced to Britta being the buzzkill that she is. Kind of a difference from
yep.
episode one, where she's like this really caring, person, and she is still a caring person in this episode. That's kind of the main point, is she is a very concerned, especially about social activism. But we get that introduction to her being a buzzkill. I love that the exchange between her and Annie, where I think Annie says something about like, "You telling us to be quiet, Britta? You sound like Guatemala." I
Yeah,
just like that's
Britta,
such a great like.
you sound like Guatemala right now.
Yeah, I just love that exchange and like that line, and it's a great introduction to Britta, the rest of the character, for the rest of the series. Again, it's unfortunate that she kind of loses some of her, I think, importance in the show. But like, we do see that's one of the qualities that make her as a character, I think, funny, and one of the comedy parts of her character. And then we also, Abed, I think we get a little more of an introduction to him and especially his meta-ness. He talks about TV and like, something that a character would never say was how TV is like real life. Oh, and I ruined it. Like that's just like no show ever had done that before to this point. I feel like, no show had ever been really that like, that was part of like the funniness of the show, was like, we are a TV show and this character is talking about TV. Like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that, and that's obviously like a big part of Abed's character throughout the show, is him relating to TV and how that kind of is how he copes with life and gets through life. But like, I mean, it's just like there's just I think some great lines and like some great introductions that we get in the second episode that we didn't get in the first episode, that are great, I think, foreshadowing of what the rest of the series is going to be like. And it really sets the tone for the rest of the show, I think.
And it showed up in that first scene, like you were talking about, that same scene where Abed's talking about how life's like TV, or that's how he sees it. Where like she's kind of first spouting off about Guatemala, and it's kind of the same thing that she'll do throughout the series, where like she'll bring up like this big, or Shirley calls her out on it. Looks like somebody was trying to bring up fridge politics, so just to feel special, like, and she kind of does that where it's like this vague, like kind of threat thing where it's like they're killing journalists in Guatemala. I remember we were doing a Bible study at up in Maryville once, and we were talking about like kind of, I forgot what like the specific topic, the specific topic, but like I remember mentioning like the idea of like the uncommitted activist, and like we kind of see like the beginnings of that with Britta here, where it's like she wants to be this like special like voice, but she can't really even commit to like the things that she really thinks about, and like the things that she wants to do. And like kind of again, like with this version of Britta early on, at the end of the episode there's some humility where she's like, yeah, I don't really do anything, so I might as well pass out brownies and cover my mouth with tape, because at least that's better than talking about it. um let's see, in this episode we get the first theme song appearance, which is fun. At least
Yeah.
that's how it was on Netflix, where I watched it. um, a question I kind of like came to my mind, because like there's a couple times in this episode, Jeff does it with Abed, where he hands him like just like a small wad of cash for his t-shirt, and there's another time where like Jeff bribes somebody, and it's like I didn't think about this as a kid, and this happened to me as well when I was doing my How I Met Your Mother rewatch last year. But like now that I'm an adult, I kind of think about how much money these people have, and it's like, oh yeah, Jeff's probably doing it. Like again, Jeff's got, I guess he hasn't been officially disbarred, or whatever. But like he's not a lawyer right now, but he still was a lawyer. Still drives a Lexus and like, oh yeah, he's probably got a pretty decent amount of cash and like and right now, I guess outside of Pierce, he's probably the richest in the group. And then the last thing I noticed in this episode, uh, the ending, Donde está la biblioteca, that kind of took off. I remember watching a video of like Danny Pudi and Donald Glover at Comic-Con like doing that like for the fans. And it like I think that was like kind of the first real moment of the show. Again, we're just in the first two episodes, but like there's not really a viral moment, if you will, in the pilot or this episode besides that. Um, Go ahead, I've been talking for a while.
Yeah, no, I honestly watching this episode, I didn't realize that Troy and Abed's rap was in episode 2. I for some reason I guess I thought it was like later on in the show. And that is like there's probably not like a more um viral moment. I guess you mentioned that like there's no other way to say it, like from this show, I feel like than that. Like that's kind of like one of the most popular things from this show, like now and like and in pop culture, is the
Mhm.
rap and like Troy and Abed in the morning, and we say that like I didn't realize that was this early on in the show, I guess. And it's a great little ending to episode 2. And yeah, I think that's one of those like that's like a moment where like, okay, this show has something, it's different, but like it's special. I mean, it starts to feel like, on rewatch now, when I first watched this, I don't think I understood the gravity of like that. But looking back now, like that's a classic moment, and like in a rewatch, like that's where the show is starting to take off and become Community.
Mhm.
And I think another scene too, like we mentioned the Chang scene earlier. His introduction is like that's kind of like just all of a sudden you are drawn into this show like this a hook. I feel like when I first watched this, I remember Pierce and Jeff's presentation, like the montage, like that was a scene where like I remember the first time I watched this show, this episode, that was I think the scene that I remembered the most from this episode, um, just because it was I don't know there was just something about like the zaniness of it and like seeing Jeff from episode 1 to episode 2, like episode 1 Jeff would not have done that ever. He was just about Britta. He was just not, he's a guy that just wanted to date the hot girl and like get his, questions, his answers for this test given to him. And like in episode 2, he's doing these crazy things with this old guy who has issues obviously, and is just trying to be, find some family. Like seeing that difference between Jeff in episode 1 and episode 2, there's just something. It's funny. I loved it. I remember laughing out loud whenever Pierce is like, "Did you say S?" It's just like it's just there. I don't know. There's really no reason that it's funny, but it's just it really feels like after that scene, this whole show just takes off. Like before that, it's just kind of okay. It's a funny show. It's about these people at community college. It's just it completely turns on its head. I feel like with that and Troy and Abed's rap. This episode, I feel like as a whole, is a good strong second episode for the show. And I feel like a lot of shows struggle in their early seasons, especially pilot episodes. Usually those aren't the best episodes of a show. But for Community, it's these are some pretty strong episodes right off the bat, and I think it's a really big reason why this show is so popular and so strong.
Yeah, the idea of the show feels like already solidified, but like kind of like what you're saying, like the characters and like the actual like direction of the show starts to feel solidified in this episode.
Oh
Of
yeah, I
like
agree.
you're gonna get a little zaniness that like, but it's not like zaniness for zaniness sake. It's real like comedic use. And again, we'll talk about the paintball episode when it comes to it, but like it's it kind of culminates in that idea of like let's take something complete ridiculous and let's not only like make it kind of cool, um, but also make it work comedically, which again is just impressive that they're able to kind of like do that with consistency over the show. I'd say so. I kind of cheated on the best of the seven with this episode, but I'd say Shirley and Annie. Like we kind of first like this is like the first image of like their kind of pairing and like their dynamic. And I think this is the first episode where we get like their awe, because like it's like that scene when Jeff walks in and everyone's like so happy to see Jeff, and he's like, the first 20 minutes you guys just kind of talk about your boring lives and your emotional problems. I just feel like I have nothing left to offer, and they both go, "Aw," like it's just we just kind of see that, like they keep that, and then obviously like the bake sale thing again is kind of like one of the moving screws of the show of this episode. And so yeah, I'd probably say for me, Shirley and Anna really, or Annie, excuse me, really stick out in this episode. What about you?
Well, yeah, that's a good answer. I'll go in a little bit different direction. I feel like, we talked about with episode one just how unlikable Pierce is, and there's not many episodes where I probably would say this, but I feel like for this episode, I think Pierce is one of the characters I appreciate for this episode, just because I feel like we maybe see him be the least douchey in this episode. If that makes sense. Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't. There's not really any big moments. I feel like he's really like super unlikable. And I think we can kind of relate to like the more annoying side of him. Him trying to like make this big giant story and keep Jeff there all night. And Jeff obviously doesn't want to be there. Like you kind of feel for Pierce, especially because I think we kind of start to get some of those like hints of him just not ever feeling like he has a family. He's been divorced 7 times. He talks about that. And I think we kind of get some of those indicators and maybe some hints of like his backstory not being super happy and his upbringing not being great, and him just trying to find some kind of family here at Greendale, which could explain why he's here, as this old man. But I appreciate, I think Pierce in this episode just for maybe the personal side that we see of him that we don't see that throughout the show a whole lot. We just kind of see him being a comedic piece that we can laugh at because of how idiotic he is. But like in this episode, I think we actually kind of see somewhat of a human side to him. He just wants to be, part of a group. He wants Jeff to respect him and to like him. I think he's just looking for a friend, and he talks about, I can't remember if it's this episode or for episode one. He says, Jeff, you remind me of me when I was a kid or when I was younger, and Jeff takes that as an insult kind of. But yeah, I think, Pierce is I think trying to make that connection with Jeff. And I think he probably wishes that he could be the person he was in his younger days now. It's one of those things. I think he's getting older, and I think he probably is looking back on his life with some regret and stuff. I think there's a lot you can unpack there with Pierce, but I think I appreciate that from him in this episode of he has that older person perspective of someone who maybe wishes they had done things differently. I think he's trying to atone for some of that stuff here in this episode and just become part of a group. And he just has some great lines too and some great moments. Like I said, him and Jeff in the presentation is, I think, a great second episode scene. Like there's a great montage of clips there that sets the tone for the zaniness of the show.
Yeah, kind of like you said, like he's really trying in this episode. Like this again, because I mean they set him up in the first episode as like, he's harassing Shirley and he's like just taking total things out of context and just doing that. But like yeah, in this episode they kind of kind of pull him back a little bit. You kind of get to see what's underneath, and yeah, there's some endearing stuff there. um I'd probably say for most relatable for me for this episode, I relate to the class watching Pierce and Jeff Screw's project. So I had a class, a small group communication, and like basically the entire class just led up to this one big project at the end of the year, right? So I think today it was like my group and then another group and then like one last group. All right. And so like like my group presented, went fine, we got an A or something like that. And the other group, went and went fine. The last group, they had they kind of had their version of Pierce. It was like this older lady. She was a non-traditional student, probably like maybe 40s, maybe 50s, and she tanked the entire presentation. And like it was awkward because like she called out everybody in her group. She was like, "Yeah, I wanted to meet with my group, but they didn't want to meet, and I had this like suggestion, but they didn't like that." And it was just like, and again, it's a class of 30 people. We're all kind of looking around like she's really just about to take she's taking down the whole ship. Like it was incredible. And I remember after like class was over, everyone left and was like, we all just watched the same thing, right? We all just watched this lady just kind of basically give her group a C+ on this assignment that was fairly easy, just to make a point. It was like, we all watched that. So I definitely relate to the class watching Pierce and Jeff in this. What about you?
Yeah, I think. Uh, well, so I'm going to cheat on this. Not so much relating to college, but the class, the Spanish class, and like obviously nobody knows what's going on in this class, like, and like nobody ever really figures out what's going on in this Spanish class throughout the whole course of the show. Like I didn't take Spanish in college. I took it in high school. I did 3 years of it, and I feel like I took 3 years of it, and I still felt like this class, like the blank looks on your face, all 3 years. When I was in Spanish, just like there's something about Spanish teachers. I feel like they always just seem a little kooky.
Yes.
My Spanish teacher was great. Like she was awesome, but like they're just they speak Spanish like the whole time, and like you're just sitting there listening to them, and they expect you to know what they're saying. And they're gonna keep talking Spanish until you get it. And
Yeah.
Chang in this episode, like he's just you see some of his craziness coming out, and like then he goes back to the like kind of being like a little bit normal, like just like a flip of a switch, and it's just kind of like funny, but like relating to like high school years and like not understanding any kind of part of Spanish, I'd probably be failing in Spanish if I was in Chang's class too, because obviously we find out he's not really actually teaching them anything. So
Yeah. But he's a Spanish genius. So,
yeah,
at the end of the day,
his knowledge will bite your face off. He's LT grade
yeah.
Cheeto.
Oh gosh. So good. Any nitpicks for this episode? For
Yeah,
you?
I one of the things I not so much a scene. I just wish we talked about Troy and Abed and the classic moment at the end of the episode and the credits scene with the rap. Like, I wish we could see. It's not so much a nitpick about this episode, but I wish we could see like between episode 1 and episode 2 what initiates their friendship. Like in episode 1, they don't interact at all, really, and then in episode 2, like they're hanging out. They're doing this, they obviously have the group project together, which could be a part of why they're friends. But like they have this rap at the end that they do, and obviously we see the kind of a friendship developing. There's a special relationship there. I wish we could just see some more of like kind of like how that happened. I just would be awesome to kind of see like the initial conversation that ignited their friendship, and how they kind of connected with each other, initially. I wish we could see more of that, but not a huge nitpick. Just something I thought would kind of been fun to see.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things like where if I kind of think about that like with Parks and Rec, where it's like if they had any idea in 2008 that Chris Pratt would become Chris Pratt, or I guess '09 was the when that show started. Like Chris Pratt would become, arguably one of the biggest stars in Hollywood and become like just a pretty decent funny man. They probably would have made him more of a redeemable character and like kind of give him
Yeah.
more screen time. And it's kind of one of those things where it's like, yeah, like if they had any idea like the kind of traction Abed and Troy would get with fans, like they definitely would have spent more time with them, like for sure. The only nitpick I have is like, did you watch this episode on Netflix or how'd you watch this episode?
I watched it on Netflix. Yeah.
Did you think like the middle of the episode was like really warm colored? I don't know. Like for some reason, I don't know if it's like my TV, but like it was like really warm colored between like the fifth minute of the episode and like the 15th. It was super weird. Like it
I didn't
kind of took
notice
me out of
that.
it.
I didn't
Yeah,
notice that. I think you just need to get your TV checked out or something because I
I
didn't
was like
notice that.
maybe I don't know. It was just super weird. But then it like fixed itself. So gosh, technology. Whatever.